While I was standing at my mother's grave watching her casket being lowered into the ground, my husband of 12 years moved his mistress into our home. The security cameras captured everything, every box, every piece of luggage, even their celebratory champagne toast in our bedroom. What they didn't know was that I own the security company that monitors our house. 3 days later, when they realized who they were dealing with, the look of terror on both their faces was absolutely priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of a quarterly review at my security firm, SecureView, when my phone lit up with my sister's number. Sarah never called during work hours unless it was an emergency. The moment I heard her broken voice, I knew something terrible had happened. "It's Mom," she whispered through tears. "She's gone." The conference room around me blurred. My mother, my rock, my confidant, my biggest supporter, had passed away suddenly from a stroke. Even at 62, she had been vibrant, full of life, always planning her next adventure. Now she was gone, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. "I need to go," I told my team, gathering my things with trembling hands. "Family emergency." My COO, Vanessa, nodded knowingly. "We've got this, Emily. Take all the time you need." I called my husband Ryan on the drive to my sister's house. His response was everything I needed in that moment. Concern, comfort, promises to handle everything at home while I dealt with the funeral arrangements. "Don't worry about anything here," he assured me, his voice steady and calming. "I'll take care of everything. You just focus on your family." I believed him. After 12 years of marriage, why wouldn't I? Ryan had always been my safe harbor, the person who stood by me when I started SecureView from nothing but a business plan and determination. He'd been there through the sleepless nights and financial uncertainties, celebrating each milestone. As the company grew from a small local business to a regional security powerhouse with over 50 employees, the next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, well-meaning visitors, and paperwork. I stayed at Sarah's house, finding comfort in sorting through our mother's belongings together and planning a service that would honor her vibrant spirit. Ryan checked in daily, his messages filled with concern and support. "How are you holding up?" He'd text. "Don't rush back. Everything's fine at home." I was grateful for his understanding, for the space to grieve without worrying about what was happening back at our house. If only I had known what "everything's fine" really meant. The day of the funeral dawned bright and clear, the kind of beautiful spring day my mother would have appreciated. The church filled with friends, family, and colleagues whose lives she had touched. I stood at the podium, somehow finding the strength to deliver a eulogy that captured her spirit, her laughter, her kindness, her unwavering belief in chasing dreams no matter how impossible they seemed. "She's the reason I had the courage to start my own business," I told the gathered mourners. "She believed in me when no one else did, when even I had doubts." Ryan sat in the front row, handsome in his dark suit, his expression appropriately solemn. During the burial, he stood beside me, his arm around my waist, a physical anchor as I watched my mother's casket being lowered into the ground. I leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence, completely unaware that he was already planning his exit from our marriage. "I need to take a call," he whispered as the service concluded. "Work emergency. I'll meet you at the reception." I nodded, distracted by well-wishers offering condolences. I didn't think twice about his absence as people gathered at my sister's house afterward, sharing stories about my mother over food and drinks. When Ryan texted that he had to handle something at the office and would see me at home later, I simply sent back a heart emoji. I understood the demands of running a business. Sometimes emergencies couldn't wait, even on days like this. It was nearly 9 when I finally pulled into our driveway, emotionally exhausted from the day. The house was dark except for a single light in the kitchen, Ryan's thoughtful gesture, I assumed, so I wouldn't come home to complete darkness. I sat in the car for a moment, gathering the energy to face our empty house, to step back into regular life without my mother in it. Finally, I made my way inside, dropping my keys in the bowl by the door. Something felt different immediately, though I couldn't quite place what it was. The house smelled different. A perfume I didn't recognize lingered in the air. In the kitchen, I found a note from Ryan saying he had been called away on an urgent business trip and would be back in a few days. "I didn't want to bother you with it today of all days," he'd written. "Get some rest. Love you." His timing seemed odd, but I was too drained to question it. I poured myself a glass of water and headed upstairs, looking forward to a hot shower and my own bed after days at my sister's house. That's when I noticed the master bathroom door was closed, with light streaming from underneath. Ryan must have left the light on, I thought, reaching for the handle. The door opened to reveal a stranger, a young woman wrapped in my towel, her hair dripping wet, obviously just out of my shower. She screamed when she saw me, clutching the towel tighter around her slender body. "Who are you?" we both demanded in unison. "I'm Emily," I said, my voice dangerously calm despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "I live here. This is my house." The color drained from her face. "But Ryan said—" She stopped abruptly, realizing her mistake. "Ryan said what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The pieces were falling into place. The unfamiliar perfume, Ryan's convenient business trip, the strange feeling that things had been moved around the house. "He said his wife was gone," she stammered, backing away from me. "That you two were separated and selling the house." A hollow laugh escaped me. "Well, he lied. We're very much married, and I've been at my mother's funeral today." Her eyes widened with genuine shock. "Funeral? He told me you were on a vacation with your boyfriend." Each word felt like another knife twisting in my chest. How long had this been going on? How many lies had he told, to her and to me? "I think you should get dressed," I said coldly. "And then I think you should tell me exactly when you moved, and what else Ryan has told you." As she scrambled to gather her clothes, I noticed more of her belongings scattered around my bedroom, makeup on my vanity, clothes hanging in my closet. This wasn't a one-night stand. She had moved in, on the very day I was burying my mother. I walked to the window, needing air, needing space to process this betrayal. That's when I noticed it. The small security camera in the corner of the ceiling, its red light blinking steadily. The same security system I had installed in our home 3 years ago when SecureView launched its residential monitoring service. The same system that recorded footage to secure cloud storage that I, as the company owner, had complete access to. The same system that would have captured everything that happened in my house while I was saying goodbye to my mother. A plan began to form in my mind as I turned back to face the woman who had unknowingly stepped into the middle of what was about to become a very calculated revenge. She had no idea who she was dealing with, and neither did Ryan. They would both learn soon enough. "Tell me," I said, my voice steadier now, "how much do you know about what my husband does for a living?" The woman, who reluctantly introduced herself as Natalie, clutched her clothes to her chest, her expression a mixture of fear and confusion. "He works in investments," she replied, her voice small. "He's a portfolio manager at Westbrook Financial." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Investment management. That's what he told you?" Ryan wasn't a portfolio manager. He wasn't even in finance. My husband was an operations director at a mid-sized tech company. A good job, but nowhere near as prestigious or lucrative as what he'd apparently described to his mistress. "What else did he tell you about himself?" "About us?" I asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Despite the hurricane of emotions tearing through me, I maintained a controlled exterior. Years of business negotiations had taught me the power of appearing calm even when you're falling apart inside. Natalie hesitated, looking toward the door as if calculating her chances of escape. Sit down, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. We're going to have a conversation. Reluctantly, she perched on the armchair in the corner, still clutching her clothes like a shield. As she spoke, the full extent of Ryan's deception unfolded before me like some twisted fairy tale. According to Natalie, they'd met 6 months ago at a charity gala, one I'd skipped because of a major client emergency. Ryan had introduced himself as a successful investment executive, recently separated from his controlling, career-obsessed wife. He'd claimed our marriage had been deteriorating for years, that we were already living separate lives under the same roof while we finalized the sale of our house. He said you were barely ever home, Natalie explained, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. That you cared more about your job than your marriage, and that you'd agreed to see other people months ago. Each fabrication felt like another betrayal, another twist of the knife. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ryan had constructed an entire fictional life to seduce this woman, a woman who, I realized with a cold certainty, probably wasn't his first affair. When did he ask you to move in? I questioned, my mind already piecing together a timeline. Last week, she admitted. He said you were going away for 2 weeks with your new boyfriend, and it would be the perfect time for me to move in before the house sold. He said you'd cleared out your things already. I glanced around our bedroom, noticing for the first time that several of my personal items had indeed been removed. Photos, jewelry, even some of my clothes. Ryan had been systematically erasing me from our home, making space for his new life with Natalie. Did you quit your job to move here? I asked, a suspicion forming. Her silence confirmed it before she even spoke. I gave notice last Friday. Ryan said I wouldn't need to work anymore, that he'd take care of everything. Of course he did. Looking at Natalie more closely, I could see why Ryan had chosen her. Young, probably mid-20s, a decade younger than me, with the kind of effortless beauty that made men like Ryan feel powerful. She seemed intelligent but trusting, the type who would believe in love stories and grand romantic gestures. Where did you live before? I continued my questioning. West Side Heights, she replied, naming an area across town known for its artist. Community and affordable apartments. I was sharing with 2 roommates, so she had nowhere to go back to. Ryan had calculated everything, ensuring she'd be completely dependent on him. The more Natalie revealed, the clearer the picture became. Ryan hadn't just betrayed me with an affair. He'd been meticulously planning to replace me entirely, to step seamlessly from one life to another without consequences. He's been lying to you, I said finally, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. About everything. He doesn't work in investments. The house isn't for sale. And until about 20 minutes ago, our marriage wasn't over. Natalie's face crumpled. But he showed me bank statements, investment portfolios. Fabricated, I replied simply. Ryan makes a good salary, but nothing like what he's apparently promised you. Why would he? She began, but stopped, realization dawning. Oh God, I've been so stupid. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered that while I was delivering my mother's eulogy, she was moving into my house, sleeping in my bed, planning a future with my husband. I think you should call a friend, I said, standing up. You need to be gone before Ryan gets back. Natalie nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Save it. I cut her off. Just get your things and go. As she hurriedly dressed and began gathering her belongings, I walked to our home office and unlocked my laptop. With a few clicks, I accessed the Secure View client portal and pulled up our home system. The interface showed all cameras active and recording, front door, back door, main living areas, and yes, the master bedroom and bath. It was all there, time-stamped and backed up to our secure server. I scrolled back through the footage, my stomach churning as I watched Ryan and Natalie enter our home earlier that day, while I was standing at my mother's grave. The cameras had captured their arrival, boxes of her belongings being carried in, and Ryan giving her a tour of their new home. I forced myself to keep watching as they celebrated with champagne. My champagne, from the case I'd been saving for Secure View's upcoming anniversary, and then christened what Ryan called their bedroom in the most intimate way possible. By the time Natalie emerged from the bedroom with a hastily packed suitcase, I had seen more than enough. I closed the laptop, a strange calm settling over me. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was about elaborate deception, calculated cruelty, and the complete disregard for our 12 years together. "I've called an Uber," Natalie said, her voice small. "It'll be here in 5 minutes." I nodded, standing up. "Before you go, there's something you should know." I walked her to the front door, where a small Secure View logo was discreetly affixed near the doorbell, something Ryan had apparently never bothered to explain to her. "See this?" I pointed to the logo. "This is my company. I founded it. I run it. And every security camera in this house reports directly to servers that I control." Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You mean, everything that happened here today, everything, is recorded. And unlike what my husband told you, I'm not some workaholic wife he's outgrown. I built a security empire from nothing, and I know exactly how to use it." The color drained from her face. "What are you going to do?" Before I could answer, headlights swept across the front of the house. Ryan's car pulled into the driveway, returning far earlier than expected. "Looks like we're about to find out," I said, a cold smile forming on my lips as I opened the front door, positioning myself so that Ryan would see both of us standing there, Natalie with her suitcase, me with my newfound knowledge of his betrayal. As he stepped out of his car, the look of shock on his face confirmed what I already knew. He never expected to get caught. He never expected me to come home early, and he certainly never expected to face consequences for what he'd done. But I was about to show him exactly who he was dealing with. The moment froze in time, Ryan standing in the driveway, car door still open, briefcase in hand, Natalie beside me with her hastily packed suitcase, and me, standing in the doorway of the home we'd built together, the weight of betrayal crushing against my ribs. Ryan recovered quickly, his face shifting from shock to calculated charm in seconds. It was a transformation I'd seen countless times in business meetings and social gatherings, the chameleon-like ability to adapt that had once made me proud to call him my husband. "Emily," he said, his voice gentle as he approached, "You're home early. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." The audacity of his calm demeanor sent ice through my veins. He was still trying to control the situation, to smooth over the catastrophic collision of his two separate lives. "Clearly," I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt in my limbs. Ryan's eyes darted to Natalie, silently communicating, something I couldn't decipher. I stepped slightly in front of her, blocking their visual connection. "Don't worry about looking to her for help," I said. "Natalie and I have been having quite the chat about your investment career." His face paled slightly, but the smile remained fixed in place as he climbed the steps to the porch. "Emily, I can explain everything," he began, using the soothing tone that had diffused 100 arguments in the past. "This isn't what it looks like." "Save it," I cut him off, echoing the words I'd said to Natalie earlier. "I've seen the footage." That stopped him cold. "What footage?" I gestured to the small camera mounted discreetly above the front door. "Did you forget who I am? What I do? Every camera in this house has been recording since the day we installed the system. I've seen everything, Ryan. Everything." His confident facade cracked, revealing a flash of genuine fear before he recovered. "Emily, please, let's talk about this inside, privately." He glanced meaningfully at Natalie. "No," I said firmly. "There's nothing to discuss. Natalie is leaving. You've lied to her just as thoroughly as you've lied to me. And you." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You need to pack a bag and get out too." "This is my house," he countered, steel entering his voice. "My name is on the mortgage." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Along with mine. But more importantly, my company's security system has footage of you moving your mistress into our home while I was burying my mother. Do you really want to test how that will play out legally?" Before Ryan could respond, the distant headlights of Natalie's Uber appeared at the end of our street. She shifted uncomfortably beside me, clutching her suitcase like a lifeline. "That's my ride," she murmured. "Go," I told her, not unkindly. Despite everything, I recognized that she too had been manipulated by Ryan's lies. "This isn't your fight." Natalie gave a quick nod, brushing past Ryan without meeting his eyes. As she hurried down the walkway, he made no move to stop her, his focus entirely on me, calculating, assessing the damage, planning his next move. When the car pulled away, we were left alone in the heavy silence. I stepped back into the house, leaving the door open. After a moment's hesitation, Ryan followed, closing it quietly behind him. The facade was completely gone now. In its place was a cold anger I'd rarely seen directed at me in our years together. "You had no right to send her away," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You had no right to come back early without telling me." The absurdity of his accusation might have been comical under different circumstances. I had no right to come back to my own home after burying my mother? "You know what I mean," he snapped. "We had an arrangement." "No, Ryan. You had a fantasy, a delusion that you could replace me with a younger model and step into some fictional life you created. There was never any arrangement." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration radiating from him in waves. "This marriage has been dead for years and you know it. You're never here. You care more about your precious company than you do about us." There it was, the familiar refrain. The narrative he'd clearly been refining for months, perhaps years. The same story he'd fed to Natalie, now served up to me as justification. "Is that the story you've been telling yourself?" I asked quietly. "That I forced you into this? That I drove you to lie, to cheat, to move another woman into our home? On the day of my mother's funeral?" "You weren't supposed to be home," he exploded, then immediately seemed to regret the outburst. "I mean, the timing was unfortunate. I was going to tell you everything when you got back." "Tell me what, exactly? That while I was grieving, you were celebrating with champagne in our bedroom? That you've been systematically removing my things from our home? That you fabricated an entire career to impress your girlfriend?" His eyes widened slightly at the last part. "How much did she tell you?" "Everything," I replied, though in truth I suspected there was much more I hadn't yet uncovered. Westbrook Financial? Portfolio management? The fictitious separated husband with the cold, career-obsessed wife? Ryan's jaw tightened. It wasn't entirely fiction. I felt the blow as if he'd physically struck me. 12 years of marriage, of building a life together, dismissed so casually. I took a deep breath, refusing to let him see how deeply his words cut. "I built my company from nothing," I said quietly. "You used to be proud of that. You used to tell people how amazing it was, what I'd accomplished." "That was before it took over your life," he countered. "Before you missed every dinner, every vacation, every chance to be a real couple." I shook my head, memories flooding. Back, late nights at the office, yes, but also Ryan's gradual withdrawal, his increasing disinterest in my work, the subtle criticisms that had grown more frequent over the years. "I was building something," I said. "Something that would secure our future. And you were right there with me, encouraging me every step of the way." When did that change, Ryan? When did you decide that my success was a threat rather than something to celebrate? He didn't answer immediately, his gaze dropping to the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, almost resigned. I don't know. Maybe when I realized I was always going to be Emily's husband instead of my own person. Maybe when I saw you outgrowing me, out-earning me, outshining. Me at every turn. The raw honesty surprised me, momentarily cutting through my anger. This was the real betrayal, not just the affair or the lies, but the festering resentment he'd hidden behind a supportive facade. So instead of talking, to me, instead of working through it, you decided to create this elaborate fiction? To plan a complete life replacement while pretending everything was fine? Ryan moved to the living room, sinking onto the couch we'd chosen together years ago. It just happened. Natalie was uncomplicated. She looked at me like I was important. And you couldn't resist playing the big-shot investment banker, I added, the pieces clicking into place. The successful man with the cold, absent wife. It must have been intoxicating to reinvent yourself. He didn't deny it, which was answer enough. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 12 years and countless lies hanging between us. I want you out of this house tonight, I finally said. Take what you need for a few days. We can figure out the rest later. And if I refuse? He challenged, a hint of his earlier defiance returning. I met his gaze steadily. Then I call my security team and have them physically remove you. Then I contact a lawyer and provide them with footage of you moving your mistress into our home while I was at my mother's funeral. Then I make sure every mutual friend, every colleague, and every family member knows exactly what you did and when you did it. The color drained from his face. You wouldn't. Try me, I replied, my voice ice. You have no idea what I'm capable of right now. Ryan stood slowly, the fight visibly leaving him. I'll get some things. As he climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I remained in the living room, my body rigid with tension. The emotional hurricane that had been building since I found Natalie in my bathroom threatened to overwhelm me now that I was alone. I wanted to scream, to break things, to collapse in tears. But I wouldn't give Ryan the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. When he returned 20 minutes later with a duffel bag, his expression was carefully neutral. We need to talk about this when things are calmer, he said. About the house, the accounts, everything. We will, I agreed. Through lawyers. He flinched slightly at that, then nodded. For what it's worth, I am sorry about your mother. I know how close you were. The sincere condolence amid everything else was so unexpected that tears threatened to surface. I swallowed hard, refusing to let them fall. Just go, I whispered. After he left, the house fell into a heavy silence. I moved methodically through the rooms, cataloging evidence of Natalie's brief residence, a scarf draped over a chair, a novel on the coffee table, a bottle of perfume in the bathroom. In our bedroom, I found several empty spaces in my closet where my clothes should have been, confirming that Ryan had indeed been systematically removing my presence. I sat on the edge of the bed, our bed, where hours earlier Ryan and Natalie had christened their new beginning. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Reaching for my phone, I called the one person I knew I could trust. Vanessa, it's Emily. I need a favor. Within an hour, 2 of SecureView's most discreet security specialists were at my house, efficiently changing every lock, reprogramming the security system, and conducting a thorough sweep for anything Ryan might have left behind. As they worked, I sat at my desk, methodically downloading and backing up every second of footage from the past week. The evidence of Ryan's betrayal was safely archived, ready if I needed it. My emotional processing would have to wait. Right. Now, I needed to secure my home, my business, and my future. By the time dawn broke, I had a new security protocol in place, a consultation scheduled with the city's most ruthless divorce attorney, and a determination that had replaced the initial shock and pain. Ryan thought he could discard me for a newer model, erase me from my own home while I was at my most vulnerable. He was about to learn how catastrophically he had underestimated the woman he married. The next morning, I woke up alone in my bed for the first time in years. The house felt different, emptier, but somehow lighter too, as if a weight had been lifted. I'd slept surprisingly well, the exhaustion of grief and betrayal pulling me under despite everything that had happened. As I stood in the shower, letting hot water wash over me, memories flooded back, not just of yesterday's nightmare, but of the journey that had brought me here. How had we gone from being partners, best friends, lovers, to this? The signs had been there, I realize now, but I'd been too busy, too trusting, too certain of our foundation to see them. Ryan and I had met at a tech startup where we both worked fresh out of college. He in operations, me in the IT security department. We'd connected over late-night debugging sessions and shared takeout dinners, bonding over similar backgrounds and ambitions. He'd been my biggest cheerleader when I first floated the idea of starting my own security firm, spending countless nights helping me refine my business plan and pitch deck. "You're going to be amazing," he'd said the night before. My first investor meeting. "They'd be fools not to fund you." 6 months later, with seed funding secured and my first small office leased, I'd proposed to him. It wasn't traditional, but neither was our relationship. I'd taken him to the rooftop where we'd had our first kiss and asked if he'd build a life with me. "I want a partner," I'd told him. "Someone who celebrates my wins and helps me through my losses. Someone who isn't threatened by my ambition but inspired by it." He'd said yes without hesitation, pulling me into his arms and spinning me around the rooftop. "We're going to take on the world together," he'd promised. For the first few years, that promise had held true. While I built SecureView from a 3-person operation into a growing regional player, Ryan supported me through every setback and celebrated every victory. He'd been there for the first major contract signing, bringing champagne to the office and taking the entire tiny team out to dinner. He'd held me through the night when our biggest early client unexpectedly dropped us, assuring me that it was their loss and we'd bounce back stronger. When had that changed? I tried to pinpoint the moment, the turning point when his support had begun to curdle into resentment. Maybe it was 5 years ago, when SecureView landed our first government contract, a security overhaul for county buildings that put us on the map as a serious contender. I remembered coming home ecstatic, wanting to share the news with Ryan, only to find him distant, congratulating me with a perfunctory kiss before mentioning that he'd been passed over for a promotion that same day. "It's fine," he'd said when I tried to talk about it. "Let's focus on your win instead." But we never really had focused on his loss, had we? I'd been so caught up in the whirlwind of scaling the business that I'd accepted his dismissal at face value, failing to see the seed of resentment taking root. Or perhaps it was 3 years ago, when I was featured in a regional business magazine as one of the top 40 under 40 entrepreneurs. The article had emphasized my journey, the challenges I'd overcome as a woman in the male-dominated security industry. There had been a photo spread of me in my office, looking confident and powerful. Ryan hadn't attended the reception, claiming a migraine. When I'd brought home the magazine, excited to show him, he'd flipped through it quickly and set it aside. "They didn't even mention that you're married," he'd commented, his tone light but his eyes hard. "It was about business leaders, not personal lives," I'd replied, confused by his reaction. "Right, just business." The comment had stung, but I'd brushed it off as a momentary jealousy. We were partners after all. We supported each other's successes. Except, as I stood in the shower now, the hot water beating against my skin, I realized we hadn't been partners for a long time. Somewhere along the way, Ryan had stopped seeing us as a team and started seeing us as competitors. My success had become his failure, my growth, his stagnation. I stepped out of the shower, wrapping myself in a plush towel, one that thankfully didn't carry the scent of Natalie's perfume. As I wiped the steam from the mirror, I studied my reflection. The woman staring back at me looked tired, yes, but also strangely composed. I'd expected to see devastation in my eyes, but instead there was a steely determination. My phone rang as I was getting dressed. Vanessa, checking in after last night's emergency. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle but not pitying. "I'm processing," I replied truthfully. "It's a lot to take in. I can only imagine." "Listen, the team finished the security overhaul around 3 a.m. New monitoring protocols are in place, and I've flagged Ryan's access badges as suspended across all our systems." I hadn't even thought about the company access. Ryan, as my husband, had been granted key card entry to all SecureView facilities, something I needed to address immediately. "Thank you," I said, immensely grateful for her foresight. "Can you also make sure his system login is deactivated? He has access to some of our client portals." "Already done," she assured me. "And Emily. I've cleared your calendar for the rest of the week. The quarterly reports can wait." I started to protest, then stopped myself. The old Emily would have insisted on getting back to work immediately, using it as a shield against dealing with personal pain. But that approach had cost me more than I'd realized. "Thanks, Vanessa. I think I need the time." After hanging up, I made my way downstairs, bracing myself to face my home in the daylight. The remnants of Ryan and Natalie's brief cohabitation had been mostly cleared away by my security team, but I could still sense the violation of my space. In the kitchen, I found a fresh pot of coffee and a note from Tony, one of my security specialists, letting me know they'd restocked my fridge and taken care of a few household tasks before leaving. I poured myself a cup, oddly touched by the thoughtfulness. Out of habit, I reached for my laptop, then paused. Instead, I took my coffee to the back patio, a space Ryan and I had designed together when we first bought the house. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of the jasmine I'd planted along the fence years ago. I hadn't sat out here in months, I realized. Maybe longer. There had always been one more email to answer, one more client to call, one more crisis to manage. Had I really become the absent, work-obsessed wife Ryan had described to Natalie? No, I decided firmly. I had built a successful business, yes, but I hadn't abandoned our marriage. The truth was more complex than the caricature Ryan had created. I thought back to the last few years, the vacations I'd suggested that Ryan had declined, claiming he was too busy, the date nights I'd planned that he'd seemed increasingly bored during, the conversations about our future that had grown shorter and less specific. We had both changed, both retreated into our separate worlds. The difference was that while I had still believed in us, in our partnership, Ryan had been constructing an exit strategy, complete with a younger replacement and a fictional life story. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Ryan, we need to talk. Can we meet for lunch?" The audacity almost made me laugh. Not even a full day had passed, and he was already trying to regain control of the narrative, to shift us into some normalized version of separation, where we could sit across from each other in a restaurant and calmly discuss the dissolution of our marriage. "No," I typed back. "All communication through lawyers from now on." His response came seconds later. "This is childish, Emily. We need to discuss practical matters." I felt a surge of anger at his condescension. "What's childish? Is moving your mistress into our home while I buried my mother. What's childish is creating a fictional career and life story to impress a woman 10 years younger. What's childish is believing you wouldn't face consequences for your actions." I paused, then added, "I have the security footage, Ryan. All of it. My lawyer will be in touch." This time, there was no immediate response. I could imagine him staring at his phone, the full implications of his situation finally sinking in. The security cameras he'd never paid attention to, the ones he'd probably forgotten entirely about in his rush to reinvent his life, had captured every detail of his betrayal. As I sat there, my coffee growing cold, I thought about the parallel tracks our lives had taken. While I'd been building SecureView into a respected regional security firm with over 50 employees, Ryan had apparently been constructing elaborate fantasies about who he was and what he deserved. I'd been naive, I realized now. I'd believed. His supportive facade, never looking beneath the surface to see the resentment festering there. I'd missed the warning signs, his increasing disinterest in my company's milestones, his vague answers about his own career aspirations, the gradual, emotional distance he'd attributed to work stress. The realization brought a strange mix of anger and relief. Anger at myself for not seeing what was happening, but relief that the fictional version of our marriage Ryan had created for Natalie, the cold, career-obsessed wife and the long-suffering, neglected husband, wasn't entirely my failure. It was a convenient narrative he'd crafted to justify his actions, both to Natalie and to himself. My phone buzzed again, not Ryan this time, but a calendar notification. My appointment with Patricia Winters, divorce attorney, was confirmed for 2 p.m. I took a deep breath, feeling the first stirrings of something like resolve. The initial shock was fading, replaced by a clear-eyed determination. This wasn't the path I would have chosen for my life, but now that I was on it, I would navigate it with the same strategic focus I'd applied to building my company. Ryan had underestimated me once. I wouldn't give him the opportunity to do so again. As I gathered my things to prepare for the meeting with Patricia, my phone rang again. Sarah, my sister. "Hey," I answered, suddenly realizing I hadn't told her about any of this yet. "Just checking in," she said. "How are you doing after yesterday?" The question, so innocently asked, nearly broke me. Yesterday wasn't just the day after our mother's funeral anymore. It was the day my marriage had imploded, the day I'd discovered the extent of Ryan's betrayal, the day everything had changed. "Sarah," I said, my voice breaking slightly, "there's something I need to tell you." As I explained what had happened, leaving out the most painful details but conveying the essence, my sister's shocked gasps turned to outraged expletives. "That absolute—" She cut herself off. "I can't believe he would do this. And now, when you're already dealing with Mom?" "The timing was intentional," I said quietly. "He thought I'd be gone longer. He was setting up his new life." "I'm coming over," Sarah declared, and I could hear her already gathering her keys. "No, it's okay. I have a lawyer appointment this afternoon, and I need some time to prepare." "Lawyer? Good. Take him for everything he's worth." Despite everything, I found myself smiling at my sister's fierce loyalty. "It's not about money, Sarah. It's about making sure he understands that actions have consequences." "Well, those consequences should definitely include a significantly lighter bank account," she insisted. "Promise me you won't go easy on him, just because you've been together so long." "I promise," I said, realizing as I spoke that I meant it. The Emily who had left for her mother's funeral 4 days ago might have been inclined toward generosity, toward an amicable split that preserved what good memories remained. But that Emily had watched her husband move another woman into their home while she stood at her mother's grave. That Emily had discovered years of festering resentment beneath a supportive facade. That Emily was finished with making things easier for a man who had shown no such consideration for her. "I'm not going to let him walk away from this unscathed," I told my sister. "He's about to learn exactly who he married and who he betrayed." Patricia Winters' office was exactly what I expected from the city's most formidable divorce attorney. Elegant, understated, and quietly intimidating. The walls were lined with law degrees and professional accolades, and the woman herself matched her surroundings perfectly. In her mid-50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes, she radiated Competence and control. Mrs. Bennet, she greeted me, extending a hand. Please have a seat. Ms. Harper, I corrected automatically. I never took my husband's name professionally. A hint of approval flickered across her face. Ms. Harper, then. I understand, from our brief call, that you're dealing with a particularly difficult situation. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out the facts. My mother's death, Ryan's betrayal, the security footage that had captured it all. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a sleek leather portfolio. The timing is especially egregious, she commented when I finished. Moving his mistress in during your mother's funeral shows a level of callousness that any judge would find troubling. Does that matter legally? I asked. Infidelity itself rarely impacts financial settlements in our state, she explained. But the manner and timing of it can influence a judge's perception of character and decision-making. And the fact that you have video evidence changes the equation considerably. She leaned forward slightly. Most affairs are denied or minimized in divorce proceedings. Your husband won't have that luxury. I felt a strange satisfaction at her words. Ryan couldn't spin this, couldn't minimize what he'd done or claim it was a momentary lapse. The evidence was irrefutable. Let's discuss your financial situation, Patricia continued. You mentioned you own a security company. SecureView, I confirmed. I founded it 8 years ago. It's entirely separate from any marital assets. I started it before we were married, and the company has always maintained its own accounts and financial structure. Patricia nodded, making another note. That's helpful. What about your home? Purchased together 5 years ago. We're both on the mortgage and deed. Joint bank accounts? One for household expenses, but our primary accounts are separate. I've always maintained financial independence. Smart, she remarked. Many of my clients find themselves financially vulnerable during divorce because they've integrated everything. We spent the next hour going through the details, assets, accounts, potential points of contention. Throughout the conversation, I felt my resolve strengthening. This wasn't just about ending a marriage anymore. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring Ryan faced consequences for his actions. There's one more thing, I said as our meeting was winding down. Ryan works for Meridian Tech. I'm not sure if that matters, but Patricia's expression sharpened. Meridian is one of our clients. Not Ryan specifically, but the company uses our firm for various legal matters. Is that a problem? I asked, concerned about a potential conflict of interest. Not for you, she replied with a small smile. It means I have certain insights into company policies that might be useful. For instance, I know that Meridian has a strict morality clause in their executive contracts. Public embarrassment of the company is grounds for termination. The implication was clear. If Ryan's behavior became public knowledge, his job could be at risk. I felt a momentary hesitation. Did I really want to go that far? Then I remembered the champagne toast in our bedroom, the systematic removal of my belongings, the calculated cruelty of timing it all around my mother's funeral. I understand, I said quietly. I'm not suggesting we take that approach immediately, Patricia clarified, but it's leverage you should be aware of. Sometimes the mere possibility is enough to encourage a reasonable settlement. As I left her office with a folder of paperwork to complete, I felt strangely empowered. The fog of shock and betrayal was lifting, replaced by a clear-eyed determination to ensure Ryan didn't simply walk away unscathed. Back in my car, I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from Ryan and a text message. You're not answering. My calls. This isn't like you, Emily. We need to talk like adults. The condescension in his tone was palpable, even through text. Always the reasonable one, positioning me as emotional and irrational. It was a tactic he'd employed throughout our marriage whenever we disagreed, presenting himself as the calm, logical party while framing my perspective as overly emotional. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I called Vanessa. "How's the office?" "Running?" I asked when she answered. "Everything's under control," she assured me, "though the Westlake contract needs your sign-off before Friday." "I'll come in tomorrow," I decided. Work had always been my sanctuary, the place where I felt most competent and in control. Right now I needed that grounding. "Are you sure? No one expects you back so soon after your mother's—" "I need it, Vanessa," I interrupted gently. "Sitting at home just gives me too much time to think." She understood immediately. "I'll have everything ready for you. And Emily, the team, knows something's happened. Not the details, but they know you're going through a rough time." "What did you tell them?" "Just that you're dealing with a personal matter on top of your mother's passing. They're worried about you." The simple statement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. While Ryan had been constructing narratives about my cold, workaholic nature, I'd built a company where people genuinely cared about each other's well-being. "Thank you," I managed. "I'll see you tomorrow." On the drive home, I took a detour, finding myself pulling into the parking lot of Lakeside Park, a place my mother had loved. We'd spent countless Sunday afternoons here when I was growing up, feeding ducks and talking about everything and nothing. After I started SecureView, we'd continued the tradition whenever our schedules allowed, walking the lakeside path while I bounced business ideas off her. I made my way to our favorite bench overlooking the water. The late afternoon sun cast golden light across the lake's surface, and for a moment, I could almost feel my mother beside me. "I wish you were here," I whispered. "I could use your advice right now." But even as I said it, I knew what she would tell me. My mother had always been my strongest advocate, the one who taught me to stand my ground and never let anyone diminish my worth. "Never make yourself smaller to make someone else feel bigger," she told me once, when I was hesitating about applying to competitive tech programs dominated by men. "The right people will celebrate your light, not try to dim it." Ryan had celebrated my light once. Somewhere along the way, he'd started resenting its brightness instead. As I sat by the lake, I felt a shift within me. Grief for my mother mingling with grief for my marriage, but beneath it all, a bedrock of strength she had helped instill in me. I wasn't going to let Ryan's betrayal define me or diminish what I'd built. My phone buzzed again, another text from Ryan. "I'm at the house. Where are you? We need to talk about this like rational people." At the house? After I'd explicitly told him to leave and change the locks. The audacity was breathtaking. I called Tony immediately. "Ryan's at the house," I said without preamble. "Can you check the security feed?" "On it," he replied. A moment later, "He's at the front door trying his key. Looks frustrated that it's not working." Of course he was. Ryan had never truly accepted that rules applied to him. "Can you send someone over?" "Already dispatching a team, 2 minutes out." "Tell them not to be gentle," I added, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. While I waited for confirmation that the situation was handled, I sat with my new resolve. This wasn't a woman scorned seeking vengeance. This was a businesswoman protecting her assets, a daughter honoring her mother's legacy of strength, a person refusing to be erased. 10 minutes later, Tony called back. "Situation resolved," he reported. Ryan left the premises after our team explained the trespassing laws. He wasn't happy, but he wasn't stupid enough to escalate with 2 security professionals present. Did he say what he wanted? Claimed he needed to retrieve important work documents from his home office. Our guys explained that he could arrange to collect his belongings through proper legal channels. I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. Ryan, always so carefully put together, facing the reality that his actions had consequences, that I wasn't going to roll over and make this easy for him. "Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it." "No problem, boss. That's what we're here for." As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of calm. The initial crushing pain of betrayal was transforming into something else. Not forgiveness, certainly, but a focused determination to move forward on my own terms. When I arrived home, I checked the security footage from earlier. There was Ryan, standing on our front porch, irritation clear on his face as he realized his key no longer worked. The entitled expectation in his stance, the assumption that he could simply return whenever he wanted despite what he'd done, it all confirmed I was making the right choice. I spent the evening organizing paperwork for Patricia, securing financial documents, and making lists of shared assets. The methodical work kept my mind focused, preventing it from spiraling into the emotional abyss that kept threatening. Around 9, my doorbell rang. The security app on my phone showed Sarah standing on my porch, a bottle of wine in one hand and an overnight bag in the other. "I know you said not to come," she announced when I opened the door, "but I decided that was ridiculous. You shouldn't be alone right now." For the first time since discovering Natalie in my bathroom, I felt the tension in my shoulders release slightly. "I'm really glad you're here." We settled in the living room with glasses of wine and the comfort of sisterhood. Sarah had always been my fiercest protector, even when we were children. "Have you heard from him again?" she asked after I filled her in on the day's events. "He showed up here earlier. Security turned him away." Sarah's eyes widened. "He had the nerve to come back? After what he did?" "Ryan's always believed he could charm his way out of any situation," I said, finding clarity as I spoke. "He's never faced real consequences for his actions. Until now," Sarah added, raising her glass in a grim toast. "Until now," I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. Later that night, as Sarah slept in the guest room, I sat in my home office reviewing the security footage again. There was something I needed to see, not the betrayal itself, which was seared into my memory, but something specific from the day of my mother's funeral. I found it quickly. Ryan standing beside me at the graveside, his arm around my waist in what appeared to be a gesture of support. But now, looking closer, I could see his free hand checking his phone, his attention already elsewhere while I grieved. Even in that sacred moment, he had been planning his escape, coordinating with Natalie, orchestrating his new beginning while standing beside me at an ending. The footage should have hurt, should have twisted the knife deeper. Instead, it crystallized my resolve. This wasn't a man who deserved my tears or my mercy. This was a man who had calculated his betrayal down to the minute, taking advantage of my most vulnerable moment to pursue his selfish desires. I downloaded the clip, adding it to the growing file of evidence I was compiling. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed, sleeping soundly for the first time since my world had imploded. In the morning, I woke with a clear sense of purpose. The path forward wasn't easy, but it was becoming clearer. Ryan had underestimated me once, assuming I would either never discover his betrayal or would be too devastated to fight back effectively. He was about to discover just how badly he had miscalculated. My return to SecureView the next morning felt like stepping into a different world, one where I was respected, competent, and in control. The sleek glass building that housed our headquarters had always filled me with pride, but today it felt like a sanctuary. As I walked through the lobby, our receptionist Deborah looked up in surprise. "Ms. Harper, we weren't expecting you back so soon." "Some things can't wait," I replied with a small smile. "How's everything running?" "Smoothly. Vanessa's been handling the client calls, and the team stepped up for the Riverside presentation yesterday." She hesitated before adding, "We're all so sorry about your mother." I nodded, touched by her sincerity. "Thank you, Deborah. That means a lot." In the elevator up to our executive floor, I took a deep breath, centering myself. For the next few hours, I would focus exclusively on work. No thoughts of Ryan, Natalie, or the ruins of my personal life. Vanessa was waiting at my office door, tablet in hand. "I didn't expect you this early," she said, falling into step beside me. The team meeting isn't until 10. I needed to get out of the house, I admitted, settling behind my desk. The familiar space, ergonomic chair, dual monitors, the small potted succulent my mother had given me when I signed the lease on this building, felt comfortingly normal. Catch me up on everything I've missed. For the next hour, we reviewed client updates, project timelines, and the pending Westlake contract. The work absorbed me completely, providing a respite from emotional turmoil. This was where I excelled, where I could solve problems with clear-headed strategy rather than navigate the murky waters of betrayal and loss. When Vanessa finally ran, out of updates, she hesitated, clearly wanting to say something more. "What is it?" I prompted. "I'm not sure if this is the right time, but there's been a development with Meridian Tech." My attention sharpened immediately. Ryan's company. "They've requested a meeting to discuss expanding their security package," Vanessa continued. "Specifically, they want to add personal security monitoring for their executive team." The irony wasn't lost on me. Ryan's company wanted to expand into personal security, the very thing that had captured his betrayal. "When's the meeting?" "Friday at 2. I can handle it if you prefer." "No," I cut in, a plan already forming. "I'll take it personally." Vanessa looked uncertain. "Are you sure that's a good idea, given the situation with Ryan?" "It's precisely because of the situation with Ryan that I need to be there," I explained. "This is business, and I won't let personal matters interfere with a potential contract expansion." The determined set of my jaw must have convinced her, because Vanessa simply nodded. "I'll set it up. Their Chief Technology Officer, David Keller, will be leading from their side." David. I knew him vaguely from company functions. A serious, competent man who had always treated me with professional respect, unlike some of Ryan's other colleagues who tended to view me as Ryan's wife, rather than a successful business owner, in my own right. "Perfect," I said, already strategizing. "Have the team prepare a comprehensive proposal. I want options for everything from basic home monitoring to full executive protection." After Vanessa left, I stared thoughtfully at my computer screen. The Meridian meeting wasn't just a business opportunity. It was potential leverage. If I impressed their CTO, if I secured an expanded contract right under Ryan's nose, the message would be clear. I wasn't broken by his betrayal, I was thriving despite it. The team meeting at 10 went smoothly, with my staff professionals hiding any surprise at my quick return behind supportive smiles and focused questions. I found myself genuinely engaged, appreciating their competence and loyalty in a way I perhaps hadn't fully acknowledged before. "Before we wrap up," I said as the meeting concluded, "I want to thank all of you for keeping everything running while I dealt with my mother's passing. It means more than you know to have a team I can count." Hers? The simple acknowledgement seemed to resonate deeply, with several team members visibly moved. In that moment, I realized how false Ryan's narrative had been. I wasn't some cold workaholic who neglected relationships. I had built meaningful connections here, created a company culture of mutual respect and support. Back in my office, I turned my attention to the divorce proceedings. Patricia had emailed a detailed asset worksheet that needed completion before our next meeting. I worked methodically through it, documenting our financial entanglements with clinical precision. Joint checking account, $8,143. 21 house value, current estimate, $765,000 with $420,000 remaining on the mortgage retirement accounts. Separate. Though we'd each named the other as beneficiary vehicles, my Range Rover, paid off, his Tesla, financed. As I cataloged our life together in dollars and cents, I felt a strange detachment, as if I were analyzing a business dissolution rather than the end of a 12-year marriage. Perhaps that was healthier, I reasoned. Emotion would only cloud my judgment, and I needed absolute clarity now. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Emily, this has gone far enough. I've retained counsel. You need to stop freezing me out of my own home. Let's discuss this like reasonable adults before lawyers make it uglier than it needs to be. His persistent framing of himself as the reasonable party, while characterizing my actions as excessive or emotional, was so transparent now. I forwarded the message to Patricia without responding to him directly. At noon, I called Sarah to check in. "How was your morning?" she asked. "Productive," I replied. "Being at work helps. How are things at the house?" "Quiet. I'm going through Mom's photo albums like we talked about." Her voice softened. "Found some great ones of you in your coding camp phase, complete with the purple hair streak." The memory made me smile despite everything. Mom hated that hair. "She got over it when you won that scholarship." Sarah paused. "I miss her, Em." "Me too," I said quietly. The double grief, for my mother and my marriage, felt momentarily overwhelming. "Any word from Ryan?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. Just more texts trying to position himself as the rational one. I hesitated before adding, "I might have an opportunity to secure a major contract with his company." Sarah let out a low whistle. "That would certainly send a message." "It's not about sending messages," I corrected, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "It's about not letting personal matters impact business opportunities." "Uh-huh," Sarah replied, unconvinced. "Well, whatever your motivation, I fully support you getting a big fat contract from his company right now." After we hung up, I spent the afternoon in strategic planning sessions for the Meridian proposal. Every detail needed to be perfect, not just because it was good business, but because it was personal in a way I couldn't entirely separate. By late afternoon, I was reviewing security footage from a client's warehouse when Deborah buzzed my office. "Ms. Harper, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's very insistent." A prickle of unease ran down my spine. "Who is it?" "She says her name is Natalie Cooper." "Natalie, Ryan's mistress. Here, at my company." "Send her up," I decided after a moment's consideration. This confrontation was inevitable, and I preferred to have it on my turf, where I was most confident. 5 minutes later, Natalie stood in my office doorway, looking considerably different from the frightened woman I'd found in my bathroom. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a simple blouse and jeans, professional but casual. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by determination. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, remaining standing until I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What can I do for you, Natalie?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She took a deep breath, clearly gathering courage. I wanted to apologize properly. What happened, what Ryan and I did, was inexcusable. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. I found none. Just a young woman who seemed genuinely remorseful. "Why are you here?" I asked directly. "Ryan sent you to plead his case?" "No," she said quickly. "He doesn't know I'm here. We're not speaking anymore." That surprised me. "What happened?" "Reality happened," she replied with a hint of bitterness. "After I left your house that night, I started really thinking about everything. All the lies he told me, how easily he manipulated both of us. I realized I didn't even know who he really was." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I called him the next day to end things," she explained. "He tried to convince me that we could still be together, that once the divorce was settled, we'd have our fresh start." She shook her head. "But I kept thinking about how cruelly he spoke about you, how he timed everything around your mother's funeral, how he systematically erased you from your own home." Her words hit me with unexpected force. Hearing Ryan's actions described by someone else, someone who had initially been complicit but was now clearly repelled, somehow validated my own horror. I realized that anyone who could be that calculating With someone they'd supposedly loved for years would eventually do the same to me, Natalie continued. And I wanted no part of it. So again, why are you here? I pressed, not yet ready to show any warmth. Natalie reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive, placing it on my desk. Because you deserve to know everything. This has all of our text messages, emails, everything from the past 6 months, including his plans for replacing you, his discussions about your company, and she hesitated, his strategies for hiding assets before filing for divorce. I stared at the small device, understanding immediately what a powerful piece of evidence it represented. Why would you give me this? Because it's the right thing to do, she said simply, and because I was raised better than to be the other woman, especially to someone who just lost her mother. Her eyes filled with genuine regret. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I hope it helps you protect yourself. I picked up the USB drive, turning it over in my fingers. Did he mention anything specific about SecureView in these messages? Natalie nodded. He talked about how he could use connections from your client list to start his own consulting business. Said he'd been gathering intelligence for months. The revelation sent ice through my veins. Not only had Ryan been planning to leave me, he'd been preparing to compete with me using information he'd gained through our relationship. The betrayal went beyond personal into professional territory, something I couldn't overlook. Thank you for bringing this to me, I said, my mind already racing with the implications. It was unexpected. Natalie stood, clearly sensing our conversation was concluding. I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but I truly am sorry. I got caught up in a fantasy he created, and I didn't stop to think about who was getting hurt. As she turned to leave, a question occurred to me. Natalie, why did you quit your job before moving in? That seems like a big risk for a new relationship. She paused in the doorway, a flash of embarrassment crossing her face. Ryan told me that once we were living together, I wouldn't need to work. He said he had a trust fund that was about to mature and we'd be set for life within a few months. She gave a rueful smile. Another lie in a long list of them. After she left, I sat quietly, absorbing everything she had shared. The USB drive felt heavy in my hand, a digital record of Ryan's calculated betrayal and potential threat to my business. I connected it to my secure testing laptop, running a virus scan before exploring its contents. The messages were damning, months of communication showing Ryan's methodical planning, his disdain for me and our marriage, and most alarmingly, his plans to leverage information about SecureView's clients and security protocols for his own benefit. In one exchange from just 2 weeks earlier, he'd written, "Once I'm out, I'll have everything I need to approach Westlake and Riverstone with a competing offer. Emily's been so transparent about their security needs, it'll be like taking candy from a baby." Westlake and Riverstone, two of our biggest clients, representing nearly 30% of our annual revenue. I forwarded the most incriminating messages to Patricia, adding a note about Natalie's unexpected visit. Then I called Tony into my office. "I need a comprehensive security audit," I told him, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Full system review, client portal access logs, everything. I need to know if anyone's been accessing information they shouldn't have." Tony's expression turned serious. "Breach concern?" "Possible corporate espionage," I confirmed. "Priority." 1. After he left to assemble a team, I sat back in my chair, a plan crystallizing in my mind. Ryan hadn't just betrayed me as a husband. He'd attempted to undermine the company I'd built from nothing. The personal betrayal had nearly broken me. But this threat to SecureView, to the livelihood of 50 employees who depended on me, ignited something else entirely. This wasn't just about surviving a divorce anymore. This was about protecting everything I'd built from someone who thought he could simply take what he wanted without consequences. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. "I have new information," I said when she answered, and I'm ready to take the gloves off. By Friday morning, the pieces of my counteroffensive were falling into place. Tony's security audit had confirmed my worst fears. Ryan had indeed been accessing confidential client information through my home network, carefully covering his tracks, but leaving just enough digital fingerprints for our forensic team to trace. He's good, but not as good as he thinks, Tony explained, walking me through the findings. Found evidence he's been downloading client contracts, security protocols, even our pricing structures. For how long? I asked, my stomach tightening. Based on the logs, about 8 months, escalating in the past 3. 8 months. While I'd been grieving my mother's terminal diagnosis, planning for her care, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy at home and work, Ryan had been systematically gathering ammunition to use against me and my company. Can we prove it was him? I needed to be certain before proceeding. Tony nodded grimly. Timestamps match when you were at the office or traveling for work, and we found a cached email on your home server where he was testing sending documents. To a private account. It's him, all right. I thanked Tony and his team, then immediately called Patricia to update her. Her response was measured but confident. This changes the equation significantly, she said. We're no longer just dealing with divorce proceedings, but potential intellectual property theft and corporate espionage. I've brought in a colleague who specializes in business litigation. What's our next move? I asked. We document everything and prepare for a two-pronged approach. In the divorce, we use this as leverage to secure a more favorable settlement. For the business side, we prepare cease and desist orders and possibly an injunction. And the Meridian meeting today? The irony of meeting with Ryan's company, while uncovering his plot against mine, wasn't lost on me. Proceed as planned, Patricia advised. No indication of hostile action yet. But be prepared. If we move against Ryan legally, his employer will eventually become aware of the situation. After hanging up, I prepared for the Meridian meeting with renewed purpose. What had started as a desire to prove my resilience had transformed into a strategic necessity. Securing this contract wouldn't just be personally satisfying, it would strengthen SecureView's position against whatever Ryan was planning. The meeting was scheduled for our largest conference room, with David Keller and 2 other Meridian executives expected. I arrived early, reviewing our proposal one last time and centering myself for what was certain to be a delicate balancing act. Vanessa joined me, sensing my tension. Everything okay? Just focused, I replied, not ready to share the full extent of Ryan's betrayal. This contract is important. She squeezed my shoulder gently. You've got this. No one does security better than you. The Meridian team arrived precisely at 2, David Keller leading the way, followed by their head of operations and chief financial officer. Conspicuously absent was Ryan, who, as operations director, would normally attend such meetings. I couldn't decide if his absence was a relief or a disappointment. Ms. Harper, David greeted me with a firm handshake. Thank you for making time. For us. I know it's been a difficult week for you. I raised an eyebrow, wondering how much he knew. I was sorry to hear about your mother's passing, he clarified, seemingly genuine. Ryan mentioned it at our Monday staff meeting. Of course, he had. Ever the concerned husband in public, even as he plotted to replace me in private. Thank you, I replied simply. Shall we get started? The meeting proceeded smoothly, with my team presenting our comprehensive security package for Meridian's executive staff. The proposal included home security systems, personal device protection, and travel security protocols, all areas where SecureView excelled. David and his team were attentive and engaged, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and technical specifications. As we moved into the financial portion of the presentation, the CFO leaned forward with particular interest. These monitoring packages, they're significantly more robust than what we've seen from other vendors. We pride ourselves on comprehensive protection, I explained. Our systems don't just record intrusions, they predict and prevent them. And the data? David asked. How secure is it? I met his gaze directly. Every piece of information is encrypted and stored on our private servers. No third-party access, no cloud vulnerabilities. We protect your security data with the same rigor we apply to government contracts. The implied comparison to our government work wasn't subtle, and I could see it had the desired effect. Meridian's executives exchanged impressed glances. And you personally oversee the security protocols? David continued. I designed them, I confirmed. Every client receives customized protection based on their specific vulnerability profile. Nothing off the shelf. As the meeting concluded, I could sense we'd made an impact. David lingered, after his colleagues left, clearly wanting a private word. I have to say, Emily, your reputation is well-deserved, he said once we were alone. Ryan's always spoken highly of your work, but I'm even more impressed having seen your operation. Firsthand, the mention of Ryan's apparent praise surprised me. Has he? David nodded, a curious expression crossing his face. Always, though recently. He paused, seemingly weighing whether to continue. He's been different lately, distracted, secretive, about some personal project he's working on. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. People go through phases, I offered non-committally. True, David agreed. Though in Ryan's case, I'm concerned it's affecting his work. He missed a major deadline last week, something completely out of character for him. The timing aligned perfectly with when he'd moved Natalie into our home. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing his personal betrayal was already having professional consequences. I'm sure he'll sort it out, I said, gathering my materials. In the meantime, we'd be delighted to implement Meridian's executive security package. My team can start as early as next week. David extended his hand. Consider it done. I'll have contracts sent over by Monday. After he left, Vanessa practically bounced into the conference room. We got it. David already texted his assistant to initiate the paperwork. Excellent work, I acknowledged, grateful for my team's professionalism despite the personal complications swirling beneath the surface. Back in my office, I called Patricia to report our success. Well done, she commended. Now, about next steps with Ryan. My colleague has prepared the cease and desist letter regarding the corporate espionage. We can serve it as early as tomorrow. I hesitated, considering the implications. Once that legal action was initiated, there would be no going back, no possibility of a quiet, dignified divorce. Do it, I decided. And Patricia? Make sure it's delivered to him at work. That's aggressive, she noted without judgment. So, was stealing my company's proprietary information while moving his mistress into our home during my mother's funeral, I countered. Fair point. We'll proceed tomorrow morning. After hanging up, I stared out my office window at the city skyline, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was a certain ruthlessness in my decision that I wouldn't have recognized in myself a week ago, but Ryan's betrayal had changed me, forced me to develop harder edges, to protect myself and my company with the same determination I'd once devoted to our partnership. My phone pinged with a text from Sarah. Just got a courier delivery at the house, legal paperwork from Ryan's attorney. So he'd made his move. I wasn't surprised. Ryan always believed in striking first, controlling the narrative. But this time, he was operating with incomplete information. He had no idea what I'd discovered about his corporate espionage, no inkling of the legal tsunami heading his way. What does it say? I texted back. Lots of legal jargon, but basically demanding access to the house and joint accounts, plus some BS about how you're emotionally compromised due to Mom's death and acting irrationally. The familiar strategy of painting me as emotional while Positioning himself as reasonable made me shake my head in disgust. "Don't worry about it," I replied. "Patricia's handling everything." "Want me to use it as kindling for a bonfire?" Sarah suggested, only half joking. Tempting, but no, just leave it for me to review tonight. I worked late, ensuring everything was in order before the weekend. The cease and desist would be delivered to Ryan first thing Monday morning at Meridian's offices, a calculated move to maximize the professional embarrassment. As I was shutting down my computer, an email notification caught my eye. A message from David Keller with the subject line, "Confidential, regarding R. Bennett." I opened it with a sense of foreboding. "Emily, I wanted to give you a heads up as a professional courtesy. Following our meeting today, I discovered Ryan has been accessing our secure servers to download company information beyond his authorization level. Our IT team flagged unusual activity this afternoon. Given our new business relationship and Ryan's connection to you, I felt you should be aware before we proceed with internal disciplinary measures on Monday. If you have insights that might be relevant, I'd appreciate a call this weekend." My heart raced as I reread the message. Ryan wasn't just targeting SecureView, he was stealing from his own employer as well. The scope of his betrayal was expanding, by the hour, painting a picture of a man spiraling into increasingly reckless behavior. I called David immediately, catching him as he was leaving his office. "Thank you for the warning," I said, skipping pleasantries. "I think we need to meet. In person. There's more you should know." We arranged to meet for breakfast the following morning at a discreet hotel restaurant downtown. As I drove home, I felt strangely calm despite the escalating situation. The pieces were falling into place, creating a clearer picture of Ryan's plans and his inevitable downfall. Sarah had dinner waiting when I arrived home, a simple pasta dish that reminded me of meals our mother used to make. "Thought you could use some comfort food," she explained, pouring wine for both of us. "Rough day?" "Illuminating," I corrected, filling her in on the developments with Meridian and Ryan's apparent corporate theft from his own employer. "Jesus," Sarah breathed. "What the hell is he thinking? It's like he's self-destructing." "Or he's desperate," I suggested, twirling pasta around my fork. "He's been building this elaborate exit strategy, but now that I caught him, everything's accelerating. Like he's grabbing whatever he can before the house of cards collapses," Sarah agreed. We ate in companionable silence for a while, the gravity of the situation settling around us. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "You know, I always liked Ryan, thought he was good for you." "So did I admitted quietly. "But this," she gestured vaguely, "this isn't just a man having an affair. This is someone systematically trying to destroy everything you've built." I nodded, the truth of her words resonating deeply. "The question is why? What changed?" Sarah considered this. Maybe nothing changed. Maybe this is who he always was, and he just got better at hiding it. Or maybe he changed and I didn't notice, I countered, the old guilt surfacing briefly before I pushed it away. Whatever Ryan's motivations, they didn't justify his actions. After dinner, I reviewed the legal paperwork Ryan's attorney had sent. Patricia had been right. Having video evidence changed everything. His claims that I was emotionally compromised and acting irrationally would crumble in the face of footage showing him moving Natalie into our home during my mother's funeral. I forwarded scans of the documents to Patricia with a brief note. "He's escalating, proceeding as planned." That night, I slept soundly for the first time in days, my path forward clear. The hidden truths were emerging, and with each revelation, my position strengthened while Ryan's weakened. He had underestimated me catastrophically, assumed I would be too broken by grief and betrayal to fight back effectively. Tomorrow's meeting with David would be another piece falling into place, another step toward ensuring Ryan faced the full consequences of his actions. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the security cameras that had captured his betrayal, the very technology I'd built my company around, now serving as silent witnesses to his downfall. There was a certain poetic justice in that, I decided. Ryan had forgotten the most basic rule of security. Someone is always watching. The hotel restaurant where I met David Keller the next morning was discreetly upscale, quiet enough for sensitive conversations but public enough to maintain professional boundaries. I arrived first, selecting a corner table with my back to the wall, a security habit I'd developed years ago. David arrived precisely on time, looking more casual than he had at our business meeting, but still impeccably put together. He greeted me with a firm handshake before settling across from me. "Thank you for meeting on such short notice," he said after we'd ordered coffee. "I realize this is an unusual situation." "Unusual doesn't begin to cover it," I replied with a wry smile. "But I appreciate your discretion." We made brief small talk until our coffees arrived, then David leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Our IT team completed their preliminary audit late last night," he began. "Ryan has been accessing restricted servers for at least 6 months. Financial data, client lists, proprietary code. Well beyond what he needs for his role." I nodded, unsurprised but still disturbed by the confirmation. "It aligns with what we've discovered at SecureView. He's been gathering our client information as well." David's eyebrows shot up. "You've been investigating him too?" "Not initially," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "We discovered the breach while performing routine security upgrades after." I hesitated, unsure how much personal information to share. "After your separation?" David supplied. So Ryan had told them we were separated. Another half-truth in his carefully constructed narrative. "Something like that," I conceded. "What I can tell you is that Ryan appears to have been systematically gathering proprietary information from both companies. We've compiled substantial evidence which I'd be willing to share if it would help your investigation." David looked troubled. "Do you have any insight into his motivation? Industrial espionage? Planning to go to a competitor?" "I believe he was planning to launch his own consulting business," I said, thinking of the messages Natalie had provided. "Using the combined expertise and client lists from both our companies as his foundation." "Bold," David muttered, "and incredibly illegal." The server interrupted to take our breakfast orders. Once she departed, David continued. "Meridian takes intellectual property theft extremely seriously. We'll be terminating Ryan's employment on Monday and pursuing all available legal remedies." I nodded, appreciating his directness. "SecureView will be serving him with cease and desist orders regarding our proprietary information at the same time." David looked surprised. "Monday? 9 a.m. We've arranged for delivery at your offices, actually. I apologize for not mentioning." "It's sooner. It was already in motion before I received your email." A smile ghosted across his face. "Coordinated strike, efficient." "We do specialize in security," I reminded him. We ate breakfast, discussing the technical details of Ryan's data theft and potential collaboration between our legal teams. By the time we finished, we had a clear plan for information sharing and aligned strategy. "There's one more thing," David said as we prepared to leave. "I'm not sure if it's relevant, but Ryan recently approached our CFO about a significant advance on his bonus, claimed he had unexpected medical expenses for a family member." The lie made me go cold. While I had been actually dealing with my mother's medical bills and funeral arrangements, Ryan had been using fictional medical emergencies to fund whatever he was planning next. "When was this?" I asked. "About 3 weeks ago." He seemed desperate, which was unusual. Ryan's always been financially stable. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. 3 weeks ago was when he'd convinced Natalie to quit her job and began planning their new life together. He'd needed cash to set their plan in motion. "That's helpful information," I said, not elaborating further. "Thank you." As we parted ways outside the restaurant, David stopped me with a gentle touch on my arm. Emily, I don't know exactly what's happening between you and Ryan personally, but if there's anything Meridian can do to support you through this process, please let me know. The unexpected kindness caught me off guard. I appreciate that, David. And for what it's worth, he added, the Ryan Bennett I've seen these past few months isn't the man I thought I knew. Whatever's going on with him, it's not a reflection on you. I nodded, strangely moved by his insight. Thank you. On the drive home, I called Patricia to update her on the meeting with David. She was impressed with the development. This is better than we could have hoped, she said. Coordinated legal action from both companies significantly strengthens our position. What should I expect on Monday? I asked. Drama, she replied bluntly. Once Ryan is served at work and realizes Meridian is moving against him simultaneously, he's likely to react strongly. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it honestly. Was I ready for Ryan's wrath when he realized his carefully constructed exit strategy was collapsing around him? Yes, I decided. I've been dealing with his manipulation for months without knowing it. At least now I can face it head on. The rest of the weekend passed in a strange haze of anticipation. Sarah and I spent Sunday at our mother's house, continuing the bittersweet task of sorting through her belongings. The grief felt different now, still raw, but somehow cleaner than the complicated emotions surrounding Ryan's betrayal. What do you think Mom would say about all this? Sarah asked as we packed photo albums into storage boxes. I considered the question seriously. She'd be furious with Ryan, I said finally, but she'd tell me not to let his actions define me. Sarah nodded, a sad smile playing at her lips. And she'd remind you that you're stronger than you think. That was her favorite line, I agreed, feeling a fresh wave of loss. I wish she was here. She is, Sarah said simply, tapping my chest, right where she always told us to find strength. Sunday evening, I prepared for the week ahead with methodical focus. I laid out my most confident outfit for Monday, AI's tailored navy suit that had always made me feel powerful. I reviewed the cease and desist documentation one final time and checked in with Tony about additional security measures at the office. We've revoked all of Ryan's digital access, he confirmed, and I've assigned 2 of our best people to monitor for any attempted breaches or unusual activity. Thank you, I said. And Tony, I appreciate everything you and the team have done this week. Above and beyond doesn't begin to cover it. That's what family does, he replied simply. No one messes with one of our own. His words stayed with me as I tried to sleep that night. Family. While Ryan had been plotting to dismantle everything we'd built together, I had been surrounded by people who genuinely cared. My sister, my team at SecureView, even professional acquaintances like David Keller. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. I dressed carefully, applied my makeup with precision, and drove to the office earlier than usual. The calm before the storm. Vanessa met me in the lobby, coffee in hand. Ready for today? As I'll ever be, I replied, accepting the cup gratefully. Tony briefed the security team. We're prepared for any disruptions. I nodded, appreciating their foresight. Ryan had always had a temper when cornered, and today he would be facing the collapse of his carefully constructed plans. At precisely 9:05 a.m., my phone rang. Patricia. The papers have been served, she reported. Our courier confirmed delivery at Meridian's reception desk 5 minutes ago. I took a deep breath. Now we wait. I didn't have to wait long. At 9:17, Ryan's name flashed on my phone screen. I declined the call, following Patricia's advice not to engage directly. Seconds later, a text appeared. What the hell do you think you're doing? Call me immediately. I forwarded the message to Patricia without responding and continued with my morning meetings. By 10:30, Ryan had called 6 more times and sent a dozen increasingly angry texts. Each went unanswered. Each was documented for our case. Just before noon, Deborah buzzed my office. "Ms. Harper, Ryan Bennett is in the lobby demanding to see you. Security has intercepted him, but he's causing quite a scene." I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself. "Tell security to escort him out. If he refuses to leave, they should call the police." "Already done," she assured me. "Tony's handling it personally." I resisted the urge to watch the security feed. To see Ryan's face as he realized he couldn't bully his way into my company the way he'd bullied his way through our marriage. Instead, I focused on the contract documents from Meridian that had arrived that morning, a concrete symbol that my professional life would continue to thrive despite his attempts to undermine it. My phone buzzed with a text from Tony. "Situation resolved. RB removed from premises. Police not required, but report filed." The brief message spoke volumes. Ryan had been physically removed from SecureView, but had ultimately backed down rather than face police involvement. His self-preservation instinct was still functioning at least. At 1:15, Patricia called again. "Ryan's attorney just reached out," she reported. "Apparently, Ryan returned to Meridian after leaving your office only to find security clearing out his desk. They're suddenly very interested in discussing settlement terms." A surge of vindication washed over me. "What's our position?" "Strong and getting stronger," Patricia replied. "Meridian's legal team has reached out to coordinate on the intellectual property issues. They're taking an aggressive stance." "What does that mean for Ryan?" "Potentially criminal charges, certainly civil liability. His career in this industry is effectively over." The finality of that statement hit me with unexpected force. Despite everything, there was a small part of me that still remembered the supportive partner Ryan had once been, the man who had helped me build my dreams in those early days. "Are you still comfortable proceeding?" Patricia asked, sensing my hesitation. I thought about it for a moment, then replied with conviction. "Yes, he made his choices. Now he can live with the consequences." By mid-afternoon, word had spread throughout the office that something significant was happening. I called an impromptu staff meeting to address the situation directly. "As some of you may have noticed, there was an incident in the lobby this morning," I began once everyone was gathered. "I want to be transparent with you all. SecureView has identified a security breach involving my husband, Ryan Bennett." A murmur ran through the room. Surprise, concern, confusion. "The situation is being handled through appropriate legal channels," I continued. "Our client data remains secure, and we've taken all necessary steps to protect our systems and intellectual property." I paused, looking around at the team I'd built, professionals who deserved the truth. This is obviously personally difficult, but I want to assure everyone that SecureView's operations and future are not in jeopardy. In fact, we've just secured a major new contract with Meridian Tech. The announcement was met with supportive nods and a few subtle thumbs up from my leadership team. "I appreciate your discretion and focus during this challenging time," I concluded. "If anyone has specific concerns, my door is always open." As the team dispersed, several lingered to offer quiet words of support or simply a reassuring touch on the shoulder. The sense of community was overwhelming after days of emotional isolation. By 5 o'clock, my inbox held 3 more updates. Confirmation from Meridian that Ryan's employment had been terminated effective immediately. Notification from our bank that Ryan had attempted and failed to access our joint accounts, which I'd frozen on Patricia's advice, and an email from Ryan's attorney requesting an urgent settlement conference. The reversal was complete. In just 7 days, Ryan had gone from celebrating his new beginning with Natalie in our home to losing his job, facing potential criminal charges, and scrambling to salvage what he could from the wreckage of his plans. As I drove home that evening, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction that justice was being served, lingering grief for what I'd lost, and a growing sense of freedom as I looked toward the future. Sarah was waiting when I arrived, a glass of wine already poured. "How did it go?" "It's over," I said simply, accepting the glass. "Or at least the beginning of the end." "He finally realized who he was dealing with," she observed with grim satisfaction. Who was I dealing with? I wondered aloud. I keep trying to reconcile the Ryan I married with the man who could do all this. Sarah considered this. Maybe both versions are real. People contain multitudes, especially when their egos are threatened. His ego? Your success threatened how he saw himself, she explained. Instead of growing with you, he chose to tear you down. Classic insecurity response. Her insight struck me as profound. Ryan hadn't changed overnight. He'd gradually allowed his insecurities to poison what we'd built together. And when those insecurities threatened to consume him, he'd constructed an elaborate fantasy with Natalie, one where he was the successful one, the desirable one, the one in control. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, refilling our glasses. Thought about the question seriously. "Legally, we proceed with the divorce and the intellectual property claims. Personally," I paused, considering. "I rebuild. I focus on secure view, on honoring Mom's memory, on figuring out who Emily Harper is without Ryan Bennett attached." "I like the sound of that," Sarah said, raising her glass in a toast. "To Emily Harper, security expert and all-around badass." I clinked my glass against hers, a genuine smile forming for what felt like the first time in weeks. To new beginnings. Later that night, alone in my office, I accessed the home security system one last time. The footage that had captured Ryan's betrayal was safely preserved for legal purposes, but I no longer needed to watch it, to immerse myself in that moment of devastation. Instead, I initiated a new security protocol for the house, one that would erase all traces of Ryan's access and create a fresh system keyed only to my biometrics. As I confirmed the changes, I felt a symbolic weight lifting from my shoulders. The reversal was complete. Ryan had thought he held all the power, that he could discard me and take what he wanted without consequences. He had underestimated me in every possible way, as a wife, as a businesswoman, as an adversary. That mistake had cost him everything, while I emerged stronger, clearer about who I was and what I deserved. My phone pinged with a final text from Ryan for the day. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." I didn't bother responding or even forwarding it to Patricia. His threats were as empty as his promises had been. He no longer had the power to hurt me, not because I didn't care, but because I finally saw him clearly. And in that clarity, I found freedom. The settlement conference was scheduled for Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the cease and desist orders had been served, and Ryan's professional world had imploded. Patricia suggested we meet at her office an hour beforehand to review our final strategy. "Ryan's attorney has been flooding my inbox with settlement proposals," she explained as we sat in her elegant conference room, each one more desperate than the last. She laid out the progression of offers on the table between us. The initial one had been almost laughably one-sided, Ryan demanding half of our joint assets, plus generous alimony based on his contribution to SecureView's success. "He actually claimed he was entitled to company equity?" I asked, incredulous. "Standard opening gambit," Patricia assured me. "They always reach for the stars initially." The subsequent offers had grown progressively more realistic as Ryan's position weakened. The latest version, delivered just yesterday, requested only his personal belongings from the house, his car, and a modest lump sum to restart his life. "Their tone has changed completely," Patricia observed. They're practically begging now. What changed? Reality, she replied simply. Meridian's legal team shared their findings with the district attorney's office yesterday. Criminal charges for corporate espionage are now a very real possibility. I took a deep breath, absorbing this information. Part of me still struggled with the magnitude of consequences Ryan was facing, consequences I had helped orchestrate. Patricia studied me carefully. Having second thoughts? Not exactly, I said slowly. It's just, the Ryan I thought I knew would never have risked this much. People do desperate things when their self-image is threatened, Patricia replied, echoing Sarah's insight. Especially narcissistic personalities. Do you think he's a narcissist? The question had been bothering me for days. Patricia shrugged slightly. I'm not a psychologist, but in my experience, individuals who can maintain elaborate deceptions while showing minimal remorse often exhibit narcissistic traits. She gathered her papers, refocusing on the immediate task. For today's meeting, I recommend we keep it brief and businesslike. No engaging with emotional appeals, no responding to accusations. We state our terms. Period. I nodded, steeling myself. And those terms? Full divorce with no financial obligations on either side. You keep the house and secure view, obviously. He keeps his personal belongings and vehicle. In exchange, we don't pursue additional civil damages for the corporate espionage. That seems lenient, I said, surprised. Patricia gave me a knowing look. The criminal investigation will proceed regardless of our civil settlement. Meridian is quite determined, and they have an airtight case. Our leniency on civil damages costs us little while giving us the moral high ground. Her strategic thinking impressed me once again. You're playing chess while he's playing checkers. Precisely, she agreed with a small smile. The goal isn't just to win, but to win so definitively that he can never challenge the outcome. Ryan and his attorney were already waiting when we entered the conference room. The contrast between the Ryan sitting there and the confident man I'd married was stark. His normally immaculate appearance had slipped, his suit slightly rumpled, dark circles under his eyes, hair less meticulously styled. He looked up when I entered. His expression a complicated mix of anger, fear, and something that might have been regret. I maintained a neutral expression as I took my seat opposite him, Patricia settling beside me with quiet authority. Ryan's attorney, a nervous-looking man named Gregory Walsh, opened the proceedings with forced cordiality. Thank you all for meeting today. I believe we have the framework for an amicable resolution. Patricia's raised eyebrow communicated her skepticism about the word amicable, but she simply nodded for him to continue. Walsh outlined their latest proposal, which matched what Patricia had shown me earlier. Throughout his presentation, Ryan remained silent, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that once might have unnerved me. When Walsh finished, Patricia calmly presented our counteroffer, identical to theirs in the material terms, but with additional non-disclosure provisions preventing Ryan from disparaging either me or Secure View publicly. These terms are acceptable, Walsh said quickly, before Ryan could interject. We'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately. My office will prepare the documents, Patricia corrected smoothly. We'll send them for your review by Monday. Throughout this exchange, Ryan remained conspicuously silent, a muscle working in his jaw. As the attorneys discussed logistical details, he finally leaned forward. Emily, he said quietly, his voice rougher than I remembered. Can we speak privately for a moment? Patricia shot me a warning glance, but I had been anticipating this request. Anything you have to say can be said here, I replied evenly. Please, he insisted, an edge of desperation breaking through. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking after 12 years together. I considered refusing, following Patricia's advice, to avoid engagement. But there was a part of me that needed closure, needed to hear whatever he thought would justify his actions. 5 minutes, I agreed, ignoring Patricia's disapproving frown. In the atrium downstairs. The small garden atrium on the building's ground floor offered both privacy and security, open enough that I wouldn't feel trapped, but secluded enough for a genuine conversation. Ryan arrived moments after I did, his footsteps hesitant as he approached the bench where I waited. "Thank you," he said, remaining standing. "I didn't think you'd agree to talk to me." "I almost didn't," I replied honestly. "What do you want, Ryan?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it caused an unexpected pang of nostalgia. "I want to explain." "Explain what? How you systematically betrayed me? How you moved another woman into our home while I was burying my mother? How you stole proprietary information from my company? Which part needs explaining?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, the accumulated hurt finding its voice despite my determination to remain detached. Ryan flinched. "All of it." "None of it. I don't know." He sank onto the bench beside me, careful to maintain distance between us. "It all got so out of control." "That's not an explanation," I pointed out. "That's an excuse." "You're right," he admitted, surprising me. "I've been making excuses for months. To Natalie, to myself. Telling myself that you were the problem, that you were too absorbed in your work, that you didn't need me anymore." I remained silent, letting him continue. "The truth is uglier," he said after a moment. "I was jealous of your success, your confidence, the respect people have for you. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing your achievements as a referendum on my failures. The raw honesty caught me off guard. It aligned so closely with Sarah's assessment that it was startling to hear it from Ryan himself. "So you decided to punish me for succeeding?" I asked, genuinely trying to understand. "Not consciously, no." He shook his head. "It started small. Resentment when you were featured in that business magazine. Irritation when people at parties asked about your company instead of my work. Then I met Natalie." My stomach tightened at her name, but I kept my expression neutral. "She looked at me like I was impressive," Ryan continued, his voice hollow. "She believed the stories I told about being an investment executive, about having a trust fund. With her, I could be the successful one, the provider, the protector. It was intoxicating." "And the corporate espionage? Was that intoxicating too?" He winced. "That was pure desperation. Once I started living this double life, I needed a way to sustain it. The idea of starting my own consulting firm using your client connections seemed like the perfect solution. I convinced myself I deserved it, that it was compensation for supporting you in the early days of SecureView. The twisted logic would have been almost laughable if it weren't so destructive. You were planning to compete against me using information you stole from my company?" "I wasn't thinking clearly," he admitted. "Once I started down that path, each step made the next one seem more reasonable. By the time I moved Natalie in, I was completely disconnected from reality. The day of my mother's funeral, I said, the hurt still raw. You couldn't even wait a day." Ryan's face contorted with what appeared to be genuine shame. There's no excuse for that. She was pressuring me about when she could move in, and I saw an opportunity. I knew you'd be gone all day." He paused. "It was cruel and calculated, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." We sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of his admission hanging between us. Part of me appreciated his honesty, but it did nothing to mitigate the damage he'd caused. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally asked. "It doesn't change anything." "I know." He looked down at his hands. I needed you to know that I recognize what I did, that I understand now how badly I betrayed not just our marriage, but everything we built together. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, he said quietly. Nothing I say can undo what I've done, but you deserve to hear the truth from me at least once. I studied him, trying to reconcile this apparently remorseful man with the one who had so coldly dismissed me as a placeholder in his life. Could people truly contain such contradictions, or was this simply another performance? What happened? With Natalie? I asked, curious despite myself. A bitter smile crossed his face. She left the night after you found us. Said she couldn't be with someone who would treat his wife the way I treated you. She was right. The irony was almost painful. The woman he'd chosen over me had recognized his character flaws more quickly than I had after 12 years of marriage. I've lost everything, Ryan continued, his voice hollow. My job, my reputation, possibly my freedom if the criminal charges proceed, and I deserve it all. I stood up, having heard enough. His confession, while seemingly genuine, changed nothing about our circumstances or my resolve to move forward. Your 5 minutes are up, I said. The attorneys will handle everything from here. He nodded, not attempting to stop me. For what it's worth, Emily, I am sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for what I did to you, to us. I paused, considering my response carefully. I believe you're sorry now, I said finally. But it doesn't change what you did or who you revealed yourself to be. I hope you find a way to rebuild your life, Ryan. Just do it far away from mine. As I walked away, I felt a weight lifting. Not just the burden of anger I'd been carrying, but the lingering doubt about whether I'd somehow contributed to our marriage's destruction. Ryan's confession had confirmed what I'd been coming to understand. His betrayal wasn't a response to anything I had done or failed to do. It was a reflection of his own insecurities and moral failings. Patricia was waiting for me upstairs. Everything. Okay? She asked, concern evident in her expression. Yes, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. Everything is exactly as it should be. The following weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings and business developments. The divorce was finalized with remarkable speed, given Ryan's eagerness to accept our terms and avoid further damage to what remained of his reputation. Meridian's case against him proceeded separately, with early indications suggesting a plea, deal involving probation and substantial financial penalties. True to her word, Patricia had drafted the settlement to ensure a clean break. Ryan was permitted to collect his personal belongings from the house under supervision, an event I arranged to be absent for. Sarah reported that he had been subdued and efficient, taking only what was explicitly his and leaving without complaint. At Secure View, the Meridian contract had expanded beyond our initial expectations, with David Keller recommending our services to several partner companies. Our security protocols had been thoroughly reviewed and enhanced following Ryan's breach, turning a potential vulnerability into a strengthened system that we now marketed as an additional selling point. Nothing tests security like an inside job, Tony had pointed out pragmatically. We found weaknesses and fixed them. That's valuable. 3 months after discovering Natalie in my bathroom, I stood in my office overlooking the city, reflecting on how much had changed. The acute pain of betrayal had faded, replaced by a wiser understanding of both Ryan's flaws and my own resilience. The grief for my mother remained, a softer but persistent ache that I now recognized would always be part of me. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Vanessa with updated quarterly projections. We're up 17% from last year, she reported happily. The Meridian contracts put us over the top. I smiled, genuinely pleased. The team deserves bonuses across the board. Let's make it happen. Already in the works, she assured me. Oh, and Sarah called. She wanted to remind you about dinner tonight. My sister had insisted on marking the official start of the next chapter, as she called it. Tonight was 3 months to the day since our mother's funeral and Ryan's betrayal, a date that could have been heavy with painful memories, but which Sarah was determined to reclaim as a celebration. "I'll be there," I promised. After Vanessa left, I turned back to the window, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city. So much had been lost in the past 3 months. My mother, my marriage, my trust in the man I'd built a life with. But much had been gained too. Clarity, strength, a deeper appreciation for the genuine relationships in my life. The security camera in the corner of my office caught my attention, its small red light a constant reminder of what had exposed Ryan's betrayal. The very technology that had built my company had also revealed the truth about my marriage, preserving indisputable evidence of the moment everything changed. I thought about the security footage I still kept securely archived, not because I needed to watch it again, but because it represented a pivotal moment of truth in my life. There was something poetically appropriate about that. Security had always been my passion, my expertise, keeping people and information safe from those who would do harm. In the end, my own security systems had protected me when I was most vulnerable, capturing the truth when deception threatened to prevail. The cameras Ryan had forgotten or dismissed had witnessed his betrayal, ensuring he couldn't rewrite history or escape accountability. As I gathered my things to leave for the day, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Celebration dinner at 7, bought champagne. The good kind, not the bottle Ryan and Mistress used. See what I did there? Reclaiming everything." I laughed out, loud, her irreverent humor a welcome reminder that life continued, that joy was still possible even after heartbreak. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting what had happened, but rather integrating it into a new understanding of myself and my boundaries. Looking around my office one last time before leaving, I felt a deep sense of ownership, not just of the company I'd built, but of my story and my future. Ryan had tried to erase me, to replace me with a younger version who would admire rather than challenge him. Instead, he had inadvertently freed me to become an even stronger version of myself. The security company I owned had captured his betrayal. The strength my mother had instilled in me had carried me through it. The future I was building would be entirely my own. That, I decided as I stepped into the elevator, was the most complete reclamation of all. The anniversary of my mother's death arrived with gentle predictability, the calendar marking what my heart had been counting down to for weeks. Unlike the sharp, overwhelming grief of a year ago, today's sadness felt more manageable, a companion rather than a dictator of my emotions. Sarah and I had planned a simple remembrance, a visit to the cemetery in the morning, followed by lunch at our mother's favorite restaurant. No grand gestures or elaborate memorials, just a quiet acknowledgement of her continued presence in our lives. "She would have hated anything fussy," Sarah remarked as we placed fresh flowers on the grave. "Remember how she always said funerals should have better food and fewer speeches?" I smiled at the memory. "And more comfortable seating. She was very specific about that." We stood together in comfortable silence, the spring breeze carrying the scent of newly bloomed flowers across the cemetery. So much had changed since we had stood in this same spot a year ago. Both of us different people now, shaped by loss and resilience in ways we couldn't have anticipated. "Do you ever think about him?" Sarah asked suddenly, breaking our contemplation. She didn't need to specify who him was. Ryan's absence in my life had become complete over the past year, with no contact beyond the necessary legal communications during the divorce proceedings. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not in the way you might think, though. I don't miss him or wonder what if. I mostly find myself puzzled by how someone I thought I knew so well could have been so different from who I believed them to be." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "The greatest magic trick isn't making something disappear. It's making someone believe they're seeing something that isn't really there." "When did you get so philosophical?" I teased, linking my arm through hers as we walked back to the car. I have a wise older sister, she replied with a grin. She taught me that going through hell doesn't define you. How you emerge from it does. At the restaurant, a cozy Italian place where our mother had celebrated every birthday for the last decade of her life, we ordered her favorite dishes and shared stories that made us laugh through occasional tears. It felt right to remember her this way, through joy and connection rather than solely through grief. As we finished our meal, Sarah raised her glass in a toast. To Mom, who would be so proud of you. Of both of us, I corrected, clinking my glass against hers. True, but I didn't rebuild my entire life while simultaneously expanding my company and becoming the security consultant everyone's fighting to hire. She wasn't exaggerating much. The past year had seen SecureView grow exponentially, our client list expanding to include several Fortune 500 companies following the high-profile success of the Meridian Tech contract. What had begun as a regional security firm was now recognized nationally, with inquiries coming in from across the country. It wasn't a master plan, I reminded her, just putting one foot in front of the other. Well, those feet have covered some serious ground, Sarah insisted. You should be proud, Em. I was proud, though it still felt strange to acknowledge it so directly. The professional success had been unexpected, a silver lining to the dark cloud of personal betrayal. The Meridian contract had opened doors throughout the industry, with David Keller becoming something of an unofficial ambassador for SecureView's services. David. His name triggered a small smile. What had begun as a professional alliance had gradually evolved into something more personal over the past few months. Nothing rushed or dramatic. Just coffee meetings that extended into dinners, conversations that deepened beyond business strategies, into hopes and philosophies. You've got that look again, Sarah observed, interrupting my thoughts. The thinking about David face. I do not have a specific face for thinking about David, I protested, feeling a warmth in my cheeks that undermined my denial. You absolutely do. It's subtle, but I'm your sister. I can read you like a book with very large print. I laughed, conceding the point. Fine. Yes, I was thinking about him. He's taking me to the symphony tomorrow night. Fancy, Sarah teased. Quite the upgrade from Ryan's idea of cultural entertainment, watching sports on mute while he explained the plays to you in exhaustive detail. That's not fair, I found myself saying, surprising us both with my defense of Ryan. He had his good qualities too, at least at the beginning. Sarah's expression softened. I know. That's why it hurt so much when he changed, or when we finally saw who he really was. I've been thinking about that lately, I admitted. Whether he changed, or whether I just didn't see him clearly. I think it was both. The man I married wasn't entirely a fiction. But somewhere along the way, his insecurities poisoned whatever good was there. And now? Sarah asked gently. Now I'm grateful, I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. Not for the betrayal or the pain, but for the clarity that came afterward. I know myself better now. I know what I deserve in my relationships. I know the warning signs to watch for. And you found someone who passes all those tests, Sarah observed. I smiled, thinking of David's steady integrity, his respect for my work, his unwavering support without a hint of resentment or competitiveness. It's early still, but yes, David is different. Different good, different everything. He's secure in himself, proud of my success without trying to compete with it. When he looks at me, he actually sees me, not some reflection of himself or what I can do for him. Plus, he's hot, Sarah added, making me laugh. There is that, I agreed. After lunch, we parted ways, Sarah to meet friends, me to stop by the office briefly before heading home. It was Saturday, but the new West Coast client had a security question that couldn't wait until Monday. Walking through Secure View's weekend quiet offices, I felt a familiar pride in what we'd built. The company had nearly doubled in size over the past year, with new divisions focusing on specialized security needs for different industries. What Ryan had intended as a devastating blow, stealing our client information, had instead catalyzed a complete security overhaul that had ultimately made us stronger and more competitive. In my office, I handled the client's concerns efficiently, then paused to look at the framed photo on my desk, a new edition, taken 6 months ago at the company's anniversary celebration. It showed me surrounded by my leadership team, all of us smiling with genuine pride and camaraderie. There was no pretense in those smiles, no hidden agendas or festering resentments. Just a group of professionals who respected each other, bound by a shared mission and mutual support. My phone pinged with a text from David. Confirmed reservations for dinner before symphony tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you. A simple message, but it carried a weight of sincerity that still felt novel after years of Ryan's increasingly hollow communications. With David, what appeared on the surface was what existed beneath. No elaborate deceptions, no carefully constructed personas. As I drove home, I reflected on the symmetry of this day. 1 year since everything had fallen apart, yet here I was, more whole than I'd been even before the collapse. The grief of losing my mother would always remain, a tender spot in my heart that time could soften but never fully heal. But the wounds from Ryan's betrayal had closed completely, leaving behind not scars, but wisdom. At home, I walked through rooms that no longer held painful memories. I'd redecorated gradually over the past year, replacing furniture, repainting walls, transforming the space into something entirely mine. The bedroom where I'd found Natalie was now my peaceful sanctuary, no trace remaining of that devastating moment. The security cameras still maintained their vigilant watch throughout the house, but their meaning had evolved. No longer reminders of betrayal, they now represented protection, foresight, the importance of seeing clearly what's really happening around you. That evening, I sat on my back patio watching the sunset, a glass of wine in hand, reflecting on the journey of the past year. I had lost a mother and a husband within days of each other, losses that could have broken me completely. Instead, I had rebuilt, reclaimed, renewed. The security cameras that Ryan had forgotten about had captured his betrayal in perfect, irrefutable detail. But they had captured something else too, the moment when my life split into before and after, the catalyst for a transformation I would never have chosen, but now couldn't imagine living without. My phone buzzed with a final text from Sarah for the day. "Love you, sis. Mom would be so proud." I smiled, typing back, "Love you too. And yes, I think she would." Setting down my phone, I raised my glass to the fading light, a private toast, to endings and beginnings, to security systems and broken trust, to the unexpected ways life can fall apart and then reassemble into something stronger and more authentic than before. 1 year ago, while I was at my mother's funeral, my husband moved his mistress into our home. He didn't know I owned the security company that monitored our house. That oversight had cost him everything, and it had given me myself.